next play will go under review.
What's going on, everybody? Happy Tuesday evening, and thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Under Review. My name is Joe DeRosa. You can find me on Twitter /X at @show_DeRosa. The tagline I am bringing back this week is Joe Cyrus Torrance, because on this week's episode of Under Review, I wanted to go over the year two players on the Buffalo Bills roster, at least those still remaining from the draft class, and just evaluate the highs, the lows, the middle ground, and really the long-term outlook of these players as it stands right now. Because frankly, all three of these players had a lot of buzz throughout the season, two specifically, and one in a lot of controversy when the season ended. And I thought it would be worthwhile to get into the nitty-gritty of their play, how they were used, and really what we could expect from them next season, and whether fans should be optimistic or pessimistic, which I could just spoil right now. I'm pessimistic on one of them, and we will start the conversation off with that player. And when I say we, of course, not just me, I have an esteemed guest to bring back onto this show, and that is Mr. Anthony Prohaska, one half of the film room and the full half, so the full of disguised coverage. Anthony, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I always appreciate your time. How you doing?
That was good. I'm good. Thank you for having me. I always enjoy coming on the show and be able to talk with you, and it's nice to be able to get one back after I couldn't a couple weeks ago. You've been super busy. I've been super busy. I was sick and all the different things that were going on. So it's nice to get in here and talk about stuff that unfortunately frustrates you and maybe other people, but it'll be good to talk about it. Maybe cathartic, and we'll see what people in the chat have to say. It should be a good time.
Absolutely. At worst, any conversation like the one we'll have tonight can be therapeutic for fans who are frustrated, which is why I always say, even after losses, like use us, use Cover One or all your Bills content as an outlet to just channel your frustration and just, spam the comments with all your anger, because comments are still good, even if they're bad. Evidently by Spin, who is our number one anti-commenter, who says, esteemed is one word for it. Spin, wow. The devil on my shoulder. Thank you for watching us this week. Be nice. But anyways, we're going to move on to the nitty gritty. The 2023 class, Anthony, which it was, looking at the list, I just laughed because I saw Justin Shorter and I saw Alex Austin and I saw, was it Richard Garage, I think? Or am I blanking? Or Nick Broker, sorry. I said, I don't know why I got him crossed up, but just a list where it's like, okay, well, you know what? If they hit on 50%, it's still a decent hit rate for a draft class, and you can, walk away with 3 starters, all this stuff. But we were talking before the show went live, and I mentioned to you that watching these players was a bit frustrating because it was fine to good, good to fine, met to fine. It was no all-star performances. It was no, this guy is a long-term, you got to extend him. This is a stupid idea to ever let this man walk. And it was defeating because in year two, I'm not expecting these players to be fully fleshed out, fully panned out, right? There's a lot of development really in all 3 of these positions, but I was expecting an encouraging year two, especially after what I would consider 3 encouraging first years, considering where these players were and where they were at least what their trajectory was shaping up to be. And it just really wasn't that, in my opinion. But Anthony, I want to flip it to you before we get detailed, just your thoughts on this class, these year two players, and really your expectations preseason to now, and kind of maybe how they've changed or what you're feeling today.
Yeah, 2023 draft class, back half, like you mentioned, Justin Shorter, round 5, Nick Broker and Alex Austin in round 7. Only 6 picks in this class, so those 3 on the back end, and the top 3, Kincaid in the first, Torrence in the second, Dorian Williams in the third. I'm largely fine with this class, which may suck for some people, depending on how you define fine or like what you want from it. Again, we were talking a bit offline. I thought the timeline for Dorian Williams' trajectory, given the college defense that he came from and what it was going to take to get adjusted to things at the NFL level, I thought it would take him a couple seasons. So for me, actually, I think he's ahead of schedule a bit with what he was able to do in year 3. So my expectations for him in this season, I thought he surpassed them. I still think he does have several areas of his game to work on, especially from a play recognition / diagnosis perspective and from a coverage perspective. But I thought he played well and did well with his time on task this year. Osiris Torrence, I think, is a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to pass pro versus run blocking. I don't think his pass pro is as bad as some of the numbers indicate, and some of the numbers indicate it that it's not good, which I'm going to go over when we talk about him. But forcing the run game, he and Spencer Brown have become such a nice physical duo on the right side of that line, just people moving, displacement capable on every single rep together. And I think it's been a significant part of why the run game has really started to take off a bit. And then Dalton Kincaid, who I feel like there's so many variables with him. The development timeline for tight ends, and then the offense the Bills have, his run blocking versus being more of a receiving tight end, him being injured for a majority of this season, upper body and lower body, some of that coming out after the year, which is a huge variable and muddies the whole conversation, which kind of gives him a pass, but also doesn't give him a pass, no pun intended. So I think it's a little frustrating with the top end of the class a little bit. But overall, I think, again, for the top three, I think it's been fine. I do think you need to give a full 3 years before you really kind of stamp any type of concrete decisions or thoughts or labels on a draft class. So we'll see what happens in year 3, but I'm excited to kind of talk about where they are after this year 2 for each one of them. Absolutely.
And yeah, I kind of use that 3-year benchmark. I used it a lot with Josh Allen and other quarterbacks, really any position in the league, because this is a phrase that's get used in our network. I think Air Raid actually used it, and I know you've used it, so many people, but development is not linear. It's not a thing that you could expect to just.
I actually don't use that one because so many people use it now that I don't say it, but I appreciate it. I may have said it years ago, but now
I was going to say, I probably crossed up you with someone because I've heard it so many times, and I just assume it's almost like one of those age-old sayings that you just pass off to kind of say, because it covers
the proverbials that get passed on and passed on.
Yeah. And with this, development isn't linear, right? It's one of those things where players can have highs and lows and come back to form the following year. And whether it's injury or whether it's just hitting a wall, those things exist for players, especially young ones that are transitioning to the NFL, the pace of it, different types of playbooks that maybe they weren't used to in college. So I have grace in the sense that these 3 players, I know it's not a finished product, and very well could, when I look back on this episode in a year, prove me wrong and make me look dumb. And that's fine. I encourage that. I always want a player to develop in a way that goes against bad expectations I have, so that I can look stupid and be happy with the player, because that will offset any of the woe I feel from this episode. And right now, as it stands, I want to stress too, I don't think that any of these players individually have been outright bad, have been poor, as much as it's when these are your top 3 picks, the last men standing from that class, you are hoping in year 2 to just walk away really, really encouraged. And I feel like it wasn't so much really, really encouraged, but rather there were flashes here. There were things here, but not anything that I'm going to say guarantees to me that this is a player that gets a second contract with the Buffalo Bills. And there's no more glaring example of that than Dalton Kincaid. And Anthony, you brought up the injuries, which are, I think, a part of how you have to have this conversation about Kincaid at this point, because each season has reared some sort of injury that has kept him out for prolonged periods of time. And with a position like tight end, where, whenever it comes to how you align your offense, or even if it comes to the development of the position itself, missing that time can be detrimental. And I feel that Kincaid missing time this season, despite the offense really continuing its stride, wasn't good for the player. And I'm hoping that could be, something that slows down in the future. But I'll turn it back to you. Overall thoughts on Dalton Kincaid's performance, his usage, role impact, the things you took away from him this season, whether they were positives, negatives, however you want to present it.
Just some numbers to put some things into perspective. So there were 10 Buffalo Bills with at least 15 targets in 2024. Keep that in mind. So 10. Tight ends, running backs, wide receivers, at least 10. There were 10 Bills in 2024 with at least 15 targets. Kincaid, out of those 10, he was 9th in EPA per target, 2nd in overall targets with 75. Shakir was 1st on the team with 99 targets, but his EPA per target was more than double Kincaid's. Kincaid was also 5th in total receiving EPA, 8th in positive play percentage, 4th in yards per route run, 6th in on-target catch percentage, and tied for 2nd. This is probably the most surprising one. Tied for 2nd in drop rate at 7.7%. overall, again, I do think the injury played a role. Absolutely, John Robert. I can still say Merry Christmas. The tree has red in it, so I'm leaving it up as a Valentine's Day tree. It's going to go down come March, and then I'm going to take the little guy, move it over there, and put it in shamrocks and green and make it a St. Patrick's Day tree for March. Just a little update on the tree process. I'll have to say the same thing on the show later tonight and not tomorrow, but I appreciate you, John Robert. I think I think this past year, again, for a guy who came out as a rookie, and those numbers that I read are just from a regular season perspective, to have the rookie season that he had, regular season as well, 90 targets, 73 catches, almost 700 receiving yards. I think there was a lot of hype and hope for what he was going to be coming into year 2. And especially with the whole everybody eats who's the tip of the spear. I think you looked at the offense and it was like, well, the best mismatch capable guy from an individual standpoint, but also from a schematic standpoint is probably Dalton Kincaid. And I know I definitely thought he would be the kind of the quote unquote tip of the spear when it came to the passing game. And now I thought that could change from week to week, and it would, because I thought the pass game would be based off the run game like it was. And so you saw kind of a bit of a rotating cast in terms of who was featured the most and how and why. But overall, I thought Kincaid's year was a bit disappointing given what he did as a rookie, given that he is a first-round pick, given that we saw struggles from the pass game from an in-structure pass game perspective, especially when they had the back-to-back losses. But even throughout the majority of the year, a lot of the best pass plays were off script or kind of jump ball, back shoulder, wow, what a catch, wow, what a throw type of deals. The in structure, just drop back, read, hit somebody, separate, get open, make a play, wasn't really the go-to. And it would have been nice if the pass catcher you drafted in round 1 2 years ago was able to kind of alleviate some of those struggles and open some things up a little bit. But again, banged up shoulder, banged up lower body, knee at some point, I believe, throughout the year.
MCL.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to use that as an excuse and just say, so everything was fine, right? But I do think that did play a role. You saw him kind of laboring a bit, taking a while to kind of scrape himself up off the ground. But overall, the numbers were a bit disappointing in terms of where he fell, how he fell. Him and Josh just did not seem to be in sync this year. Allen missing him on throws, whether it was Allen just not being sharp, which I think he wasn't sharp on a good chunk of plays this year, but I think a lot of that will get glossed over because he won the MVP. So whether it was Allen not being sharp or maybe Kincaid's not hitting his landmark or not hitting the right spot and the two aren't in sync, at the end of the day, there was just a disconnect between what the hope was for Kincaid, what the trajectory was thought to be versus what the actual productivity and production we got on the field was. And again, I think there's a multitude of explanations for it behind the scenes and even on the field as well. But either way, I think it was a bit of a letdown and underwhelming considering the rookie year that he had and the hope and potential that he could have had this year, given the way the offense was changing and the trajectory it had as a group.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would say disappointing is the right word. It's not to say that Kincaid himself didn't have flashes of what he could be and that the pros of his game weren't there, because they were at times. I mean, to give him, his flowers in some aspects, I thought, again, that ability as a zone receiver to kind of recognize space, get leverage was there at times, just not consistently. I thought he would have these downfield routes where he'd win them, but not consistently. I thought there were times where he actually did make a nice little impact block on a play and then get open for whether that was a leak or whether it was just to create an option post chip. And that did happen, but not consistently. And that's kind of the name of the game for me with Dalton Kincaid, like you allude to, Anthony. It's just, there's a myriad of factors that do go into the conversation for him this season when you talk about, and we'll get into this topic specifically, I'll ask the question, but when you talk about his injuries, when you talk about Josh Allen relative to him, the chemistry. But what concerns me about Kincaid was last season, I could forgive blocking woes because he was a rookie, right? And we know that tight end is typically a slower developing position. Dawson Knox wasn't the greatest blocker when he came out of college, came to the pros. He eventually developed it to a very quality level. And here you are with Dawson Knox getting vital snaps and kind of key moments in games where he could be a downfield passing threat because of the blocking. So I was optimistic that Kincaid could follow that same trajectory, but the blocking component of his game to me is such a glaring flaw. Again, you talked about it offline, Anthony, him being willing. He is, but you could only be willing to block so much before, if you're not effective, it doesn't really matter, or it's just going to limit you. And that's kind of the thing that worries me long term for Dalton Kincaid is, will this actually develop? Can he actually put on any more size to his frame to be able to block a bit better? And can he capitalize on that by being a downfield threat, where if he can line up and line a bit more because he did put on size, because he does block better, does that add some more multiplicity to the Bills offense? Does that in turn increase the amount of snaps he can get? Does that in turn mitigate some of those deficiencies you saw between him and Josh? Because my belief is, if you can't block and you're lined up in such a limited role on only certain types of plays, the reason that it's such a glaring example of bad chemistry or a disconnect is usually because of limited opportunity, which I personally didn't feel like Josh had that same issue with Dawson Knox, someone that's been around longer, someone that he has a better feel for, someone that kind of picks up on him a bit more. Again, not that Kincaid can't do it at all, but rather that in year two, I'd expect more. So that's kind of where I stand on that. And I want to flip it back to you, because just on that point of Josh Allen, we know about the off-target percentage to Dalton Kincaid and how glaring that was when you talk about his season-ending stats, the advanced analytics. How much of Kincaid's struggles, in your opinion, do you see as him as an individual and the deficiencies in his game versus he is creating opportunity, or he is, generating chances for Josh Allen to hit him and Josh just straight up misses him?
I think it's a bit of both, like it is with everything. Like, there's very rarely anything in sports, but especially in football, because there's so many moving parts on and off the field. Very rarely does anything boil down to like, yep, it was just this one guy. It's all on this one guy. Now the ratio could be different. It could be 50-50. It could be 90-10, 70-30, whatever the hell. But, there were times, I think, where Kincaid did his job and Allen could have been better in his job. I think there were times where Allen did his job and Kincaid could have been better in his. And I think the biggest thing for me with Kincaid, and you touched on it, it's not even necessarily just kind of like the, off-target percentage or the disconnects in the pass games. I think that all can be worked on. Like, you can get back in the lab together and work on your timing and work on your synergy. And, this is where I'm expecting you to be. Okay, like, this is what I'm seeing if I'm Kincaid. Okay, I was getting pressed here or jammed here, so on. Brady, I think, also comes into play as well, like how he uses the tight ends, what he's looking for. And I think that part of that is tied to something you said. And I said this when Kincaid got drafted. I said it on my show a bunch of times. I said it in the film room. I said it on Locked On Bills with Joe Marino. I think so much of Kincaid's value was going to be tied and is tied to his ability to block. If you are going to be a 12 personnel team, the way you can maximize value the most from that 12 personnel grouping is being able to access most of the menu, play calling wise, from a pass and run perspective, without having to turn the page. And what I mean by that is being able to be in 12 and being able to go spread and true spread and pass the ball, being able to go condensed and mash somebody on the ground, being able to work the play action piece, so on and so forth. So a lot of Kincaid's value and his ceiling is tied to his ability as a blocker, because if he cannot function as a run blocker, essentially he's just a big wide receiver, which can still be fine, right? Like, look how good Matt Collins is as like a big wide receiver who just blocks and does the dirty stuff and catches passes from time to time. But if you're not going to be a force as a blocker, as a tight end, you have to be ultra productive and good and efficient and everything as a pass catcher and as a route runner and as a receiver. And I just think Kincaid's not there yet, because he's in year two and he was a bit banged up last year, and all the pieces that we talked about in the previous part to start this segment here. But my biggest thing is just that run blocking ability. And then if he, again, like you said, and we talked about offline, he is willing. So that's sweet. So then what's the issue? It's like, well, some of it is technique and some of it is how he's built, size, frame, length, the mass that he has or doesn't have. Okay, so do we want to add more mass and kind of thicken his frame up a little bit? Okay, we can do that, but how much does that sacrifice his fluidity and his technicality as a pass catcher? How much does it change? Like, is his body optimized to carry 240 pounds? So if you try to push him closer to 250, do we start to see more soft muscle injuries or type of things where, because you're trying to push him over the edge and his body's not meant to carry that much because his frame is what his frame is? And all of these conversation pieces and elements are a little annoying to have, because you don't want to be doing this going into year three for a guy. This is something you'd like to have settled going into year one, or at the very least coming out of year one, cycling in a little bit. And just given the direction of this Bills offense, which was more condensed formations this year, using the run game as the foundational element to the offense. And hey, we can run through dudes' faces and teams' faces and through their gut, however you want to verbalize it. We can do that at will and have a variety of run concepts. And then we'll build the pass from there. And then we'll marry the pass with the run, so on and so forth. Kincaid's fit gets a little wonky, I think within that. And just talking, we talked about it offline, just from an alignment perspective. Only 25.8% of his snaps came in line, 12.7% came out wide, and 60.5% came in the slot. So essentially, he was like a big slot or a power slot, however we want to however we want to verbalize it in 2024, which again isn't terrible, but then you just have to be very good in that pass catching role because your value is diminished elsewhere. And I think that also ties into the schematics, what Brady likes to do, how Brady has traditionally used his tight ends, where he focuses the pass game, where he focuses the run game, how the rest of the wide receiver room is built or not built, which is a whole nother kind of worrisome conversation going into 2025. For me, it really stems from that, just what he is as a run blocker and how it limits him, his usage, and the offense in general.
Yeah, and again, it's not that can't develop at all, but I just worry based on the fact that you've had year two to see growth in that aspect, and I just don't think I've seen it. And more so, even going beyond blocking, but when you talk about how defenses are approaching the Bills offense, and one of the kind of Bills quote unquote kryptonites when it came to how you can mitigate their passing attack is by playing stout, athletic man coverage, being as sticky as possible and trying to take it away. Yeah, and it's just like, literally, when I think of Kincaid and like some of the things you alluded to, it's really just all those concerns of, okay, so now what happens if we go into year three and he's still not capable of, consistently beating man coverage or consistently avoiding getting knocked off his route stem, all of these factors. And it's to a point where I'm like, do you see a long-term, I guess, shelf life is the word I'm looking for here for Dalton Kincaid on the Buffalo Bills? And I know this might be a bit overreacting, but when you think about when he was drafted and what the regime looked like when they drafted him, and you had Ken Dorsey calling the shots, and maybe there was that uptick in 12P, but by different design and kind of something that we saw wasn't working the way they wanted to. A lot of, layers for error for Josh Allen. It was sloppy, and ultimately Dorsey gets moved on from. You bring in Joe Brady, and Joe Brady wants to run this in a different way. And like you've talked about so many times and, nailed in the offseason going to now with condensed formations, now that being the crux of what the Bills offense, dude, I remember you were saying it in like this time last year. Like, I'm not even joking. I'm pretty sure you did the film threads like by spring. So I'm like, I got to give you the flowers, because I haven't heard that term used more in my life until I would tune into Disguise coverage after my show would end. And it'd be like, every single week. And that's not me. I'm not throwing shade. It's just straight up. That is quite literally, I'm like, all right, I think you can't say this 6 weeks in a row and not have me expect that that's just going to fucking happen this year. But what I'm getting at is, like, I'm thinking about the old guard that had Kincaid, brought him in, had a vision for him. Now you have Brady, and Brady tries to make it work. And it's not that they're abandoning this idea of 12P, but maybe the archetype of tight end that they want in 12P or 13P or 21 or whatever it may be, and how that kind of translates to Kincaid going into year three. And if we see these deficiencies continue, I mean, this might be a hot question, but do you think Kincaid even makes it to the end of his rookie contract with the Buffalo Bills? Do you think there is a path where the team might decide that the fit isn't there and it's time to move on?
Oh, spicy.
Yeah, I had to throw one at you.
Yeah, a little spice. For me personally, I'm not at that spot yet where I'm even not necessarily not entertaining that question. Like, if he's part of some trade package to land some awesome defensive player, like, okay, fine. But I'm not ready to jettison him or trade him or move him. And part of it too, again, I really like to wait 3 years until kind of making a decision on anybody, whether how good or bad. We've seen guys light up the world as a rookie, and then all of a sudden they come back down to earth and crash harder in year 2 and year 3. We've seen the opposite. We've seen guys look terrible in year 1, and all of a sudden year 2 and year 3, it's like, oh my God, like, look at this guy. Like, what is he doing? So on and so forth. So for me, I think he's safe for now. And I do think his skill set still presents matchup elements that you can take advantage of. And again, I don't want to keep using this as the low-hanging fruit and the excuse maker. I do think the injuries played a significant role, like just how he plays and what his style is. I think that matters a lot. Now, going into this year, I would like to see Brady maximize him a little bit more. I would like to see Kincaid maximize himself a little bit more. And when I say Brady, I mean more schematic elements. Like I think there were times in terms of creating separation and things he could have done potentially a little bit better to open some things up. But then the same thing with Kincaid, like you said, I think there were times where he had guys on him on tape and I was like, oh, whew, he's going to cook this dude. And I'm like, how is he not cooking this dude?
Yeah.
Like, why are we not seeing? And again, maybe it's the injury, maybe it's something else. Like, I don't know, but I think things should be better for him in year 3. My question though is more, instead of like, does he see out the lifespan of this contract? I think the bigger question for me is, what kind of value or production do we get from him in terms of a snap share perspective, the direction of the offense? Like, I don't know. Again, it's still so early. Like, I don't know if he's ever going to be this 100 target guy with regularity or, 70 catches again. He might be 65 catches in like towards the high end. It might be a different kind of value, especially if the Bills continue to lean into, and part of this is because maybe you don't have a 12 personnel package that can live in the light and the dark with the run in the pass, but maybe the Bills keep going with these 6 offensive lineman sets that allow them to do so much and it present a schematic advantage. Like maybe they go receiver in free agency and maybe in the draft, and we see more 11 personnel starts to come back in, and then Kincaid gets phased out a little bit, I still don't think the value is necessarily there for Knox. Like he's become a good blocker and he's a good inline tight end. I really wish you could just morph like the best of Knox with the best of Kincaid and make them one tight end and reduce the cap hit at the same time. That would be fantastic. But I'm not out on him yet. I'm not ready to kind of say that he won't see out the life of his, concurrent contract with this team. But I do think, maybe we have to tweak the expectation for him or tweak the way we see good. I think a lot of people initially, even myself included, I think a lot of it from a volume perspective, it was for more of a volume perspective. It was like, hey, good for Kincaid looks like, 70 to 80 something catches and 700 to 900 yards receiving, 6 to 8 touchdowns. I think maybe it's more matchup based. Maybe he only gets 3 targets a game, but all 3 targets and there's 3 catches and he's got 50 something yards and 2 of them were on third downs and 1 of them was in the red zone and it led to a touchdown. Maybe more high leverage usage and high leverage scenarios, kind of like, that bullpen pitcher that you want. He came in and he only pitched 1 inning, but it was the murderous part of the opponent's lineup in the 8th or the 7th or the 6th. And it's like, you're looking at the box score and it's like, oh, he only pitched the 6th inning. And what did he do? It's like, yeah, but he went through their 2, 3, and 4 hitters, and that was the most important part. Or he came in with runners on first and second, no outs, and he went through the 2, 3. You know what I'm talking about? You're a baseball.
Or you could end up in the opposite situation where you bring out a starter who hasn't pitched in 3 months and throw a cookie to one of the best lefties in baseball and lose the game 1 of the World Series. Sorry, please continue.
No, it's fine. I was going to be mean and make another joke off that, but I'm not. Partly because of karma and just I don't want to rub things in from that World Series. Man, I really wanted to, but I won't. So yeah, I think maybe we tweak the expectation of what good looks like, especially within the success of the offense, right? And again, that might be, I feel like people are still going to have a problem with that because like, well, now we got to move the goalpost because the Bills drafted this guy that can't dominate or that they can't use, so on and so forth. I do think there's a lot of questions around him. Like there's so many questions defensively for the team this year. And then I think questions around the receiver spot sneakily in this offseason and maybe even running back, depending on what you think about James Cook and the money he wants. But Kincaid is a sneaky one of like, what does year 3 look like for Dalton Kincaid? And what does that mean for the offense? I think it's a fun conversation to have. Well, also maybe scary. I guess it depends on how you define fun.
Yeah. Well, I guess scary can be fun if you're into horror movies, and the ideal horror movie for you is the year 3 development of your tight end. And I just look at Kincaid from year 1 to year 2. And year 1, I think meets that criteria of good, right? Because one of my biggest things going into that year was I just want him to be like 1/2 of a 1,000-yard receiver with Dawson Knox, and let's see 12P work in tandem. And the numbers he put up were solid. I mean, when he was targeted 91 times, 73 receptions, 673 yards, low in touchdowns, only 2. But I mean, I sat there thinking this this is your floor with Dalton Kincaid. And then, of course, injury plays a role in the overall output. And I thought that there were gasps and flashes from Kincaid this year that maybe go, okay, I'm feeling more comfortable. Like the Seattle game, the Tennessee game, that kind of mid-season stretch run where I was like, I'm seeing it now. Like there's a bit more comfort happening. The rapport's building a bit more, and I think it's good. But then obviously the injury happens. He comes back. It's not nearly as effective. I mean, the Detroit game, he should have had better numbers because of the phantom call that took away the chest pass touchdown. So we'll never have that, which kind of pisses me off because that was awesome. But like, even then, I still feel like all these factors that we've presented when we talk about the conversation around him going into next season, it has to be on the minds of everyone, because if that blocking component doesn't develop, then yeah, I do worry about what we deem good being kind of like still not met, because despite the fact that, again, I'm not expecting 1,500, something insane like a wide receiver one in the NFL numbers for him. Usually that benchmark of like 850, like 6 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns, I'm sitting here thinking like, hell yeah, I'll take that from my tight end. I just worry that we're not even going to meet that going into the future. And I would like to see 2025, obviously throw that development for Dalton Kincaid and his blocking ability, but also the health. The health is just, to me, another glaring flag with him that I'm hoping can be reduced, where he could stay on the field, be available. It's a very physical position. I'm not blind to the fact that every tight end in the league is playing with something, but you got to stay on the field. And when we're talking about development, the only way you're going to develop is by getting meaningful reps. And the only way you'll build on that chemistry is by getting the reps. And the only way you're going to do that is if you're on the field, and you got to be on the field, and it's got to be consistent. And I'm hoping to get that from him. I'm hoping year 3 proves that. Again, I'm not out on him. I'm just starting to kind of get worried at this point. And I'm hoping year 3 quells the worry. But if it doesn't, you go back to the drawing board and you figure it out. And any final thoughts on Dalton Kincaid before we move on to our next player?
No, I was just looking at like some stats by game, and he only passed 50. And again, banged up, yada yada, missed some games this year, yada yada. But he only passed 50 receiving yards in the regular season 3 times in 2024, and his highest individual receiving yards game was 53 yards, which was in week 15. Yeah, against Detroit. Now, receiving yards are not holistically indicative of like, this is what's good or this is what's bad. Same thing with like touchdowns or any just one single individual metric that may be situational. But I just say that to kind of put it into perspective of like, oof, like not a fall from grace, but just not what you want to see. Again, injuries play a role and all the other things we talked about, but he really should be able to go up from here. Not that he's starting at rock bottom again or at 0, but like he should surpass year 2's numbers in year 3. It's just a matter of by how much and what does that look like. And then if we're having a similar conversation to this next year, because it's like, yeah, he did better, but, or is it like, yeah, he did better, this is what we wanted to see? Fun.
Yeah, I think there is a very realistic path to Dalton Kincaid trailing both numbers and ending up becoming, that true tight end threat you want, even if it's just in the ballpark of like 700 something yards and just a slight uptick in touchdowns. And I'd be more comfortable living in that world. But yeah, I think just to put a bow on this conversation about him, it's not that I think the player is bad. It's not that it's a guarantee they move on from him. I just have questions about the long-term shelf life of Dalton Kincaid and an offense that predicates itself on physicality and true run blocking and being able to get dirty. And if you can do that, but also be effective at it. And he just isn't effective enough to sell the idea of putting him in line and not having people on the defensive bench see him in line and kind of giggle. It's like, okay, we're going to destroy this man. I mean, I think of the Houston Texans game, and I think of some of the times where he got just pushed back by their linebacker core. And I'm like, I can't see this again, man. So I'm hoping for the growth of the player. Do I think it can happen? Absolutely. Am I quitting on him? No. Am I concerned? Yes. I will leave it there, and we will move on to our next player.
I have one more piece real fast.
Oh, go for it.
Real fast on him. No, I just think and not having the true complement of skills at the wide receiver spot, for me, particularly like not having enough dudes or dude with the juice to stretch the field and kind of take the top off the defense. When you are a Bills team that sees a ton of single high, both man coverage with cover 1 and zone with cover 3, what does that mean? Like on the back end, you have a single high post safety, but then you have more guys in between the numbers, in and around the hashes, bodies around the box. So that means less opportunity to separate. That means more of an opportunity for guys to like take away your airspace and restrict passing windows. And if Kincaid is operating in that slot around more bodies, around more traffic, I think it would do him and the team some good, not only to have like a true one potentially on the team or someone with those true X characteristics, but just a field stretcher in some capacity where the defense has to be like, do we have to go too high here? Or do we have to shade that post safety to the single receiver side or the speedier receiver side? And then it opens things up for Kincaid a little bit. That was a big part of me of why the in structure pass game struggled, because so much was constricted, from the top down and especially in between the numbers.
No, and that's a great point too. And I agree with you. And I think if you can find the field stretcher that is a legitimate threat, whether it's in free agency, which alluding to your film room episode, you guys will be talking about tomorrow, or whether you find it in the draft where you go find a true speedster. I always reference Jalen Royals because he's just the one that I've gotten to read about the most, and I'm a fan of him. But guys that can go upfield and get it, or guys that can just win with separation and speed, that is a missing component, at least consistently, for this Bills receiving core that they will need to build upon. And I think it would benefit Dalton Kincaid. But again, it'd be one thing if we found out that, or I'm sorry, it'd be one thing if they took him in like the 3rd or 4th round, but like this is also a 1st round tight end. This is someone that you invested and traded up to go get, mind you, significant capital and time and resources into. So you were hoping at the same time, you wouldn't have to be having the conversation of put this complementary piece to be able to field stretch to make things easier for him. Again, not saying that can't work. It absolutely can. But you were hoping he could be an individual talent that just does it himself. And it just hasn't happened that way. So at this point, I'll take what we can get. And that's something we can get. I hope it happens.
Very fair.
Osiris Torrence, Anthony. So this is a player that, again, has been stalwart when you talk about availability, has been able to be in front of Josh, and that's a great trait of his game. And you already highlighted the run blocking, which I do think is great from him and I think is developed well. Deficiencies in pass protection is something I noticed, but I want to flip it back to you and ask you for your thoughts, performance, usage, impact on the team.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. I went through some numbers, and again, I know people have I don't pay attention to PFF's grading. I use PFF for a lot of different advanced metrics, and I love a lot of them. I don't pay attention to the grading. You will never hear me be like, oh, this person has a 73.8, whatever grade. Like that must mean they're great. Or, oh, they have a 50. That's terrible. I don't even know what good is for their grade. So I don't pay attention to that. But I do notice from like comments on the shows and comments on Twitter, like people would reference how much PFF hates Osiris Torrence. And I never really knew why, but I figured it was grading. So again, maybe what I'm about to say, take it with a grain of salt, but per PFF, he was tied for the 5th most pressures allowed amongst guards in 2024. That was out of 78 guards. He was tied for 5th. He was also 57th out of those same 78 in pass protection efficiency. I didn't think he was that bad on tape. I didn't, chart all the pressures he gave up. Now I kind of want to, just as an exercise to go and see what I got versus what they got. But I don't think he was bad in pass pro. I think overall, when you are the size that he is, and he's slimmed down, like that was my biggest thing, seeing him as a rookie versus seeing him live and in person at the Senior Bowl, both on the field at practice and out at dinner the one night that we went. He was just so massive. And then I saw him at camp on his first day at camp as a rookie, and he slimmed down a lot. And I thought that helped him because he needed to be able to move more with speed guys, with guys who could slash, guys who could dip and bend and move and mismatch him from a speed and quickness standpoint on the inside. But even with him slimming down, he's still a huge dude. He's got huge, strong, vice grip hands. He is a power people mover, a displacer. That's what he is on the inside. So when you have that, and the heavy feet that he has, not necessarily in a bad way, but you're going to struggle at times with pass pro. If you overcommit or you miss with your punch or you're facing somebody who has technique and speed, that can be a problem for him inside. Or if you commit too much on a stunt and you recognize it and read it late and you have to come back inside and someone's got the angle on you, or you read it wrong, or the timing's not right between you and Spencer Brown, you can get caught out. And I do think those things would happen for him from time to time. But I don't think he's as bad as the numbers indicate. And I'm not saying that as a homer. I just didn't come away as a person who literally watched every single snap of the Buffalo Bills on both sides of the ball multiple times this year. I did not come away thinking oh, Osiris is a problem, or McMahon, this guy's a hole
Right.
at right guard against the pass. So I don't think he's that bad, as the numbers would indicate. And especially, using that and juxtaposing it, like we talked about and you alluded to, him as a run blocker, just what he can do, chucking dudes off the line, being able to move and get to the second level and attach, which I thought he's done much better in the NFL than he did at Florida. I think part of it, again, is slimming down and being able to move better and being more fleet of foot to climb to the second level and being more agile. But I think he's a benefit to this offense. That physicality, I think, is needed. Spencer Brown has the physicality, but also has a lot of athleticism. I think Deion Dawkins has some nastiness to him, but I really do think Brown and Torrence lead the offense from like a tenacity, meanness type of perspective. And when you talk about their pairing together, I just think is such a huge piece. They can just blow dudes off the ball, knock them back, get to the second level. You're creating alleys. You are creating holes and gaps and just moving dudes around. We saw him pull a little bit this year and show some athleticism. So overall, I thought he had a fine year this year. I'm excited to see what he is in year 3 as he continues to build from a technicality perspective. And then I wonder what that means for the offense with Connor McGovern, this being his last year under contract. Same thing for David Edwards. So who gets, Torrence is going into year 3, obviously. Is Torrence the next lineman they commit to? Is it McGovern? Is it Edwards? Is it all of them? How much do they try to keep this offensive line group together? Is Torrence like the next cornerstone? And then they try to rotate through with center and left guard. But I think he's played well overall, especially from a run perspective. And then he does well enough in pass pro to not be a hole and a liability.
I got curious and I wanted to look at PFF because I looked at it earlier today and I saw the grades were brutal, but also just going through some of the stats and they have him as number 1 in guards, 20% of qualifying snaps and hurries, which I thought was funny. And just, I think Osiris Torrence, the run blocking component, I think it works better that this is kind of the ratio of his game for this offense because of how much this offense wants to run the ball and wants to be physical to a point where I think not that you could forgive any deficiencies in pass protection or pass blocking, but rather if that has to be the secondary part of your game as far as what you're best at and the primary is your downfield nature, the aggression you block with, the ability to create lanes, whether it's gap, whether it's zone, then that's a world I can be comfortable in. And I think Osiris Torrence is probably the player on this list as far as the 3 that I have the most optimism for, because again, it was, I think when he was taken, a lot of people chalked it up. Well, he's not really an Aaron Cromer guy, but they'll try to make it work. And I mean, if this is year 2 where you're getting consistent snaps, first and foremost, having the availability, but also being able to maul and just benefit the backfield and be able to just be someone that, whether it's off script for Allen, or whether it's like a design quarterback run for Allen, whether it's going with something to his side, you could feel comfortable knowing that he's not going to lose that rep and run. That's the biggest thing for me. When it came to pass pro and what I was able to watch of him, it did feel like there were times where he just got caught on his own feet, almost like whether it was someone going underneath him and trying to be able to just use, whether it was power, which is something you wouldn't really expect from his frame and someone as big as him despite the weight loss. It felt like there were times where he would just get caught off balance, get caught flat-footed, and get knocked back. But then
there's some of that that stiffness to him, especially in that lower body. So if he gets caught and you could say this of a lot of guys, but he can get caught and he's almost dead in the water because he doesn't have that fluidity and that flexibility to adjust and create and switch. Which
you talked about Brown and his athleticism and Torrence not really having those traits, but still being able to kind of develop into that role. That's kind of the thing I want to watch for and see from him in the next year is just more short up pass protection. Because I think like one of the concerns about him coming out and maybe part of the reason why his stock fell, because I remember early conversations about Torrence being potentially mocked to the Bills at 27 in 2023 before they traded. And then he fell all the way down to 60. And I was like, holy shit, like he's still there. Like they could still get this guy. And I was like, oh, please let it be like a reverse Creed Humphrey. But you get him and then you're kind of like, all right, so let's just see maybe if there is any sort of like cautiously optimistic approach to his development we should have because of this fall. And a lot of the knocks on him were really just, again, his feet, the way he could anchor in pass protection. How can that hold up in the pros? And I thought that there were times this year where he looked unbeatable. And I mean, someone brought it up in the chat and I know it wasn't perfection, but the matchup against the Chiefs in the regular season was really encouraging from Torrence, especially in certain reps where he was singled up with Chris Jones and he was able to hold his own and really just like maintain discipline in pass pro. And then there are games where he just looks kind of clumsy and games where it's not as short up and you're kind of wondering like, which Jekyll Hyde are we getting in this game? So I think for me, with Torrance, again, the run blocking is something I don't have to get into any further because we know he's good at it. We know it can continue to develop, but I feel confident in that fact that it will. And just what can he look like as a pass protector for Allen next year? And kind of the microcosm for him to me when I talk about this O-line is you just have to be good enough because Josh Allen can, in his own right, be able to extend plays and create opportunity and just survive in the pocket and just get off of pressure. So as long as you could just be good enough, that's all I can ask for. And I think Torrance at this point, despite inconsistencies, is good enough with room to be just, again, stout, unmovable, really a true presence on this O-line for years to come, and someone that I would feel confident, if this upcoming season, those things are shored up, then having those extension conversations.
No, I think that's fair. And, you mentioned like my next point with it is just that I think his struggles at times in pass pro, I think are more acceptable in this offense because of the presence of Josh Allen. Having the lowest pressure to sack percentage out of 44 qualifying quarterbacks this year, that being, and I say it year after year, like I think that's his best superpower, the ability to not let pressure turn into sacks, and then also kind of turn a lot of those into positive plays into some semblance or form is ridiculous for Allen. So maybe, if Torrance is playing for the Lions, maybe his performance stands out more negatively because if he gets beat, Goff isn't doing what Allen is capable of doing and so on and so forth. So I do think Allen makes everybody across the line. I think he's an equalizer for everybody on the offensive line because we don't come away from games thinking like, man, so-and-so just got beat and blown up and that drive stalled out because, so-and-so got beat so bad and there was pressure immediately on Allen. But because so many of those times it's like, yeah, that happened. And then Allen stiff-armed the defensive lineman in the face and chucked it 40 yards for a completion. And we forgot who
basically
even got
the
beat.
Detroit game.
Kind of, yeah. Like you forget who got beat and where and how because Allen erased it and turned that negative into a positive. The same way we're like, and that happens all the time, right? Like even some of Allen's decision making. How many Allen plays have there been where it's like, oh no, don't do that. Oh, okay, cool. And then it's like, oh, that decision was not sound, but I'll take the result. And we forget about how unsound that decision was. So I do think Allen covers up for some of the deficiencies for Torrance, as he does across the entirety of the offensive line because of the type of player that he is and the caliber and the level that he operates and plays at, so on and so forth. So I do think that is a part of it. And then again, the run being so important to this team. So you've got this guy who's a good people mover as a run blocker, check. And then where does he struggle? A little bit in pass protection. Oh, but you have a quarterback who can erase your mistakes and make you right even when you're wrong. What a good setup. So I do think that kind of he's insulated a little bit within the scheme and system and the direction that this offense is operating in, which I do think is interesting if they get to a point like if they have to go more spread, and they have to go with more true 5-man protections up front, do you start to see more struggles? Do you start to see more wider alignments on the inside to try and put him on an island in one-on-one? But then also, if you're the defense, do you want to do that and open up an A gap or a B gap for Josh Allen to just step up and be like, oh, okay, I'm just going to step up and run for 7 yards real quick? Like that's, again, that comes into play because a lot of the things that defensive lines or coaches would want to do to take advantage of this guy, you have to do that at your own risk because Allen is just kind of the get out of jail free card back there so much. So all of it, I think, is kind of connected and a bit of a chicken egg scenario to a degree. But I overall think I've seen some like difference of opinions on Torrance. Some people who are like, no, the grades, who cares what PFF says? Torrance is awesome. And then I've seen others that are like, oh, that's absolutely right. He's terrible. He's a vulnerability. And I wasn't expecting to see all that just because I don't really pay attention to a lot of social media fodder, but yeah, I just didn't think he was bad this year. And then maybe it's because I'm a run first guy and you give me a dude who can chuck dudes off the line for 5 or 6 yards and I'm down.
Yeah, and those are great points about the true 5 because I think that's something that I worry about a little bit too. If you do have to live in a world where you have to, whether it's because you're playing from behind or whether you just want to go empty, whether they would even do that because it seems like the metamorphosis of this offense is to just control with your rushing attack. But they've had to be in those situations a few times. I mean, even the final play of the season against Kansas City. And, one of those things where that pass protection component, if you have to play from behind, even if you have the speedster in the room and you're wide wide receiver room and we have longer developing plays that can work, can he hold up as an individual?
Yeah.
If there's a stunt in front of him, can he hold off and not take the bait or give up the space? And I'm not even faulting him for that final play, because that final play was just Spags masterclass and completely exploiting, the protection they had set. But
yeah, you have to know that that's coming. If you're Brady and Allen, you have to know. Like, Eric and I talked about it in the film room. And I literally, not to pat myself on the back or say, look how much, and I'm literally yelling at the TV, like, corner blitz from the boundary, corner blitz, here it comes, God damn it. And I slammed the remote because you have to. Sorry, I'm still annoyed at that. Continue.
No, it's okay. I'm still annoyed at it too. And I intentionally left Kincaid out of that conversation because it was beating a dead horse. But even the fact that the ball got to that spot and Kincaid was wide open and he had to adjust, I get it. But the fact that it was in his hands.
Isn't that play so and I hate to be this guy, it's so Bills, because not only do you have the initial failure, but the fact that they almost got out of it and probably should have, but still failed. It's not there was pressure and Allen got sacked. Oh, there was pressure and he had to throw it away. It's there was pressure and there was an amazing play and it didn't happen. It would have so Bills.
I personally believe if that's a completion and they go on to win the game, we would be talking about it as the greatest Allen play ever. The greatest throw from Josh Allen ever. I mean, you think of all of his highlights and all of the really just incredible plays he's had to make. If that was what really led to you converting a 4th down to beat the Chiefs in Arrowhead to go to the Super Bowl, I'd put that as his best throw.
Well, yeah, it's a high degree of difficulty, and then the context and the situation, oh my God, I think that's very fair. Oof.
But I want to bring this up from Carl. Carl, thank you so much for your super chat. Greatly appreciate you. And you say, have you looked at the penalty harm stat, the sum of harm rating where the penalties negate scores? Has Torrance the big offender on the Bills in 2024? I personally haven't heard of this stat, but I do remember him being heavily penalized. That's something I actually should have accrued for the show, so I'd have to find it. But what's your thought on this, Ant? I mean, is that something you think Torrance can clean up next season as well?
I didn't know that was the penalty harm stat. I didn't know that was a thing. So
yeah, I haven't heard of this.
No, and I kind of think
that's playing 4D chess, man.
Yeah, Carl, I want to know whose stat is that? Who is it? What site or article or whatever? Whose stat is that? Overall from a where I just
it's 7 in 2024, which was ranked 113th out of 135 guards.
Yeah, so I have him.
It's a high degree.
I have him with 2 penalties in 2024 per PFF.
PFF really does hate O'Cyrus Torrance, man. Unless I'm reading this wrong.
He's only got 2 penalties.
Where am I seeing this? Interesting. Look at this, Carl brought something up, and now I have to look into this. I haven't heard of this stat, and now I'm really curious.
Yeah, I want to know what penalty harm. I've never heard of that, and I'm very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I mean, I'm very interested. I'm very interesting. That's not weird.
But I think just to put a bow on this conversation too with O'Cyrus Torrance, again, if you're talking about the Bills having to live in a world where they'd have to play from behind or have an uptick in their passing rate, or maybe whether it's play action, then they ramp that up and go into true play action. And if you have to have Torrance protect longer term, I think that's something I'd watch out for as something he could develop on. But in the world they live in now, with how they run the ball, how they like to control the clock, and how that really is where their game is predicated from and what they stem from when they throw the ball, I think it's acceptable now with room for Torrance to just continue to develop as a guard in the NFL and become someone who that pass protection even just takes that minor step forward, and you just can long-term have this guy. I don't feel comfortable saying that he could earn that second contract yet, but I think he is on, of this list, the best trajectory to do so, and I'd be perfectly fine with it if we get those things that we have talked about. And I want to move on to Dorian Williams. When you talked about the evaluation for O'Cyrus Torrance, if people were saying he's great, oh, he sucks. I also thought of Dorian Williams because I think there's a lot of hot and cold in his game. And I'm going to just say this and then I'll turn it to you. To me, he was at his best when he didn't have to think. That's just what it was. Dorian Williams is someone that when he can just go, he goes. And he does it extremely well when he can play with full speed because he's not slowed down, whether that's because he didn't have to think, whether that's because the line did its job. He hits home and he hits home hard, and he makes some really nice plays in run defense. But there are times, man, where like the reps he loses are just ugly as hell. Whether that is in pass coverage where he just gets baited and he's out of position and tries to compensate, gets caught flat-footed, tries to make a tackle, gets completely shedded and falls on his back, whether it's getting mauled downfield because maybe he slowed down and someone with the bigger frame just pushed him. Those are the things that are the hot and cold of Dorian Williams and what I would call the Dorian Williams experience. I don't think it's bad. And I think that there is a path for this man to inherit these starting, like whether it's either side of your mic, but it's not there yet. And I do still have worries about him, but I'll turn it to you, Ant. Same conversation as our other two players. What were your thoughts on Dorian Williams?
Kind of to piggyback on your one piece, I thought there was more positive for Dorian this year than anything, almost to the point that I found it just be very hyperbolic in a lot of ways. Like the amount of people that were like, who cares if Milano comes back? We got Dorian Williams now. Or like Milano's first game back, and they were like, oh, get him out of the lineup. Dorian's so head and shoulders above at this point, so on and so forth. I thought Dorian Williams, like I said, he had a good year this year. Amongst 92 qualifying linebackers in 2024. He was 22nd in run stops with 27. He was tied for 12th in run stop rate at 9.9. He was tied for 27th in tackles for loss plus tackles for no gain. He also had the 11th highest average depth of tackle at 4.8, which means like how far past the line of scrimmage. So his average depth of tackle is 4.8 yards. So essentially he's making tackles 5 yards past the line of scrimmage. I thought he, like you said, at best when, coming forward, and that's not to say that he's dumb or he can't diagnose. Again, we talked about it offline, and I've said this a million times. The defense that he came from at Tulane was very just robotic. It was a spot drop based defense. Hey, you're at the hook to curl, get to your depth, turn around, look for somebody. That's it. There was no pattern matching. There was no really reading concepts. I remember I watched like 6 games of his coming out of that class, and I counted him carrying a tight end like vertically in some form of coverage 3 times. Everything was just get to your spot, get to your depth, turn around, look for somebody, almost like you're playing Madden. So he was coming from, in a non-disrespectful way in any way, he was coming from just a basic level defense, coming to the NFL and coming to a defense that was communication-based, responsibility-based, adjustment-based. You're matching guys. You're figuring out where to drop and how to drop and adjusting based on, they're in a 3-by-1. Now they're in a 2-by-2. We're checking the call. What's my responsibility now? How am I functioning in the run fit in addition to how I'm functioning in terms of coverage and what my depth and landmark is? So I thought it was a significant change for him. That's why I expected him to take I remember when they drafted him, I said, we won't know how good Dorian Williams is until year 3 because he needs a lot of time to simmer and marinate a little bit. I thought the time on task this year helped him. I liked him much better coming forward than I did him dropping into coverage. I think it was telling, given how athletic he is. I thought it was very telling that he's still coming off the field for the dime, looks on third downs, which again, no disrespect, but if you're comfortable with both linebackers, you're probably leaving them there like they did prior.
Yes.
We'll see what a healthy Milano and Bernard looks like in 2025 and if they continue to roll with dime. But I think his propensity to kind of take the candy, take the bait a little bit. The Baltimore game is a good example, although it happened to a bunch of guys on the defense. But, they're just literally like the plastic keys for a baby. Like, look over here. And he's like, and the ball is just on the other side. And you're like, but again, that's happening to a lot of guys on the defense. Granted, it's him and Spectre in that game. But they're just taking the bait left and right. And I think he does have a propensity still to be misled, to fall for misdirection, to fall for eye candy, to be out leveraged and again, take that bait and all of a sudden he's in a bad spot. But the length showed up, the physicality, the speed, the athleticism, more so against the run than against the pass. But I think overall a positive and encouraging year, like the jump that he made, just, again, the traits, if you can tap into that, we'll see what it looks like long term. We'll see what it looks like with Milano's contract going forward. Maybe this is Milano's last year. Maybe Dorian takes over in year 4. I do like the option of knowing that if they need to go base and put 3 linebackers out there, I'm confident in that 3 linebacker group, especially with Dorian showing the ability to kind of almost play some Sam and play up on the line of scrimmage as that end man. You kind of have a 5-man surface up front. I positive, encouraging year. I think the time on task helped him. No, I don't think he's better than Matt Milano. I don't think he's ready to supplant Matt Milano. I don't think Matt Milano needs to leave. I thought Milano looked better and better with each passing week, and he should be back to a very good version of himself in 2025. It would take a lot for me to put Dorian ahead of Milano, but I do think Dorian's continuing to trend upward, and with his traits and physical gifts that he has, he does have a relatively high ceiling. It was just going to take him a little bit of time to get there.
I think we're close to a world where close to a reality where life after Matt Milano is a real conversation. I think the world where he is off the team is close, but I don't think we're there yet. I think Milano still has some juice in the tank, and I think this upcoming season will just be another year of Matt Milano taking that starting role and Williams kind of being his understudy in a pinch if he gets banged up or if they do go in base. And I think Williams, just like I said earlier and what you've alluded to, there are, like anyone on this list, flashes of really solid quality reps, but it's really those more dynamic plays where you're facing offenses that use a lot of motion, use a lot of misdirection, and just get him caught like with his pants down to his ankles. Like you talked about the keys, which I envisioned like a lineman holding keys on the field and him just being like,
oh. And then the ball's behind him and he's like, what? The key, the color's so colorful.
I just, that instantly popped into my head, which got me. But there are just simply times where I watch him and whether it's he has to come up from depth, but he doesn't do it right away, or maybe he is just taking the bait on a bootleg. Like the Titans game, there's a really bad rep where he just kind of takes that cheese and all of a sudden there's a tight end left wide open that he has to now compensate for and run towards the boundary for.
It happened right off rip in the preseason against the Bears. It's like a play action and he's got Cole Kmet man on man and he steps up to play the run and Kmet runs right by him and then he's like, and he has to hightail it back and Kmet's wide open in the seam.
Yeah, and that's like, it's a struggle if you're a linebacker that plays with instinct and plays with aggression, right? You want to hammer home, you want to get downhill quickly, but the second you get baited into that aggression, kind of a microcosm of the Bills' defense in some ways, if you think back to some of their games this year, when you're in trouble, because are you athletic enough to offset that mistake? And in the case of Williams, I think he is. However, sometimes he just makes too much of a sell to a point where he's just so out of position, it doesn't matter if he can compensate or try to get back quickly because the option is there. But in the times where he comes up from depth and he reads a play correctly, whether it's like a check down that he has to account for, whether he actually picks it up and carries someone, I think he can do it. And I think that those flashes are there for him. And I think that when you talk about his development and what you're expecting from him, the world of him being able to inherit that role is there for him, but there's more development to be had. And I just don't think he's there right away, which is why I don't think we should have conversations of Milano getting let go or Milano getting released unless they want to go sicko mode in this draft and find a hybrid coverage linebacker and just say, screw it, let's reset this whole thing because we think that position has enough value. I wouldn't want them to do that when they have really more glaring, obvious deficiencies on D-line and in the secondary. But if they decide to do that, then maybe they do. And I'm not even going to entertain it. Dorian Williams has a path to be a starter on the Buffalo Bills after Milano leaves. I think, again, some of the snaps and run defense and some of the aggression he plays with where he can get off a block, again, that's not a consistent thing either. It is something where I can nod my head and say, there you go, Dorian. Like, that's it. That's what we want. Do that every rep. But then there's times where he'll just get completely handled and can't shed it and gets off balance and falls down or just is not in position to make a tackle. And ultimately, it's one of those things where if we have this player and you are filling in the shoes of one of the best linebackers we have seen, you could probably even call it in Bills history at this point with Matt Milano, then those are big shoes to fill, and you have to be as buttoned up as he was, or there's going to be a natural drop off to some degree. And, what you pointed out with the dime was a big thing too, because earlier in the year, when you don't have Milano, and even in games where you don't have Bernard and you didn't have Taron Johnson, they still elected to go that route over trusting Dorian Williams in coverage consistently, because it's just I don't think he can do it consistently. And here we are. And we run into these problems where someone is left wide open. Even in the first game of the year, I think he had a rep. It was either on maybe it was McBride, maybe it was Michael Wilson or Dortch. I can't remember the receiver, but he actually mans this receiver up. And this is like towards the end of the game. And this was a pretty big first down because it gave the Cardinals a chance to go for a deep shot and potentially be in position to win the game. And he's manning someone up. And then this receiver just makes a second move and off script and just dusts him. And he goes flying and he just falls to the ground, leaves him wide open. It's a first down. And I remember watching it on Game Angle being like, what? Like, what the fuck? Why are they like, what's going on? And then you watch it later and you're like, Dorian, what are we doing? Stay on your feet. Why are we like, those are the things that you kind of just scratch your head over. But again, year 3 for Dorian Williams, if you can clean some of that up, if you can play more sound, if you can read and process a little bit faster where you are not being handled or teams aren't scheming to get you in bad position, then I think you have a case to be made that when Milano does go or does end his tenure with the Bills, there is someone waiting in the wings to take that spot that you can feel comfortable with. Anthony, flip it back to you. Any final thoughts on Dorian Williams before we say goodnight?
No, I was encouraged by his play. I still think that, like we talked about, there are things that he needs to clean up. I think he's still more suited for a rotational linebacker spot than he is a true starting linebacker right now. But for me, at least, I don't think that's bad. Like, he's ahead of schedule for me. I thought he would be further behind heading into year 3 than he is right now. So I am pleasantly encouraged by... I guess I wouldn't have to say that because you wouldn't be negatively encouraged because that wouldn't be encouraged. But either way, I'm in a good spot with him and where he is.
You're encouraged?
Yeah, I'm encouraged. Yeah, I'm whelmed. I'm encouraged. Yeah, I'm encouraged by what he did this past year. The depth that he provides at a spot that, listen, Bernard has gotten banged up a bunch. Milano has gotten banged up a bunch. Teams want to put the Bills in a bind with heavy personnel and all this kind of stuff. So cool. Like, now we have a third linebacker, or we have a guy that can fill in for 1 to 3 games if Milano goes down or Bernard goes down. And then he's continuing to stack reps and time on task, and we'll see what he's doing. Yeah, I am. I'm going live right after this with JP Acosta, and we're doing some combine.
Oh, hell yeah.
Need stuff. Yeah, me and JP are going to talk positions of need for the Bills going into the combine, who the movers and shakers are at the combine at each of those positions of need, and who you need to watch, and what it'll do to the draft order, the rankings, and what it means for the Bills. So yeah, I am Iron Manning it a little bit. I like that. But I think I'm encouraged by what Dorian was, but I think it's all relative to what your expectations were. If you thought Dorian was ready from the jump, you're probably pissed off that he's still sitting on the bench. If you thought that his pass coverage reps were terrible, then you think he should never see the field. So I think it depends on what your expectations were for him initially, but I'm encouraged by where he is, and I like where he is right now.
Yeah, I don't think I can add much more other than I do hope to see that leap for him in year 3. I think he has an opportunity. As Milano continues to get older, granted, he came back and was pretty consistent in the lineup with a couple tweaks. I think to his hamstring was one of them. I think that
he got better each game. Like, yeah. I mean, watch the AFC Championship game. Like, they go odd mirror. He closes down Mahomes in a heartbeat in space, where if he doesn't make that tackle on third, and it was on 3rd down. If he doesn't close down Mahomes and make that play, Mahomes is doing his little duck walk for that first down, and it's a killer. Like, he got better each game, taking on blocks. You're seeing that trigger. You're seeing that jump and that drive. In theory, you should get more of that and then some with a full off season of health. I think, a returning healthy Milano makes a big difference, especially with how Bernard plays.
And you think about Dorian Williams and what he's kind of seen, while he's been on the roster when it comes to Milano, and how often Milano has actually gotten to play in front of him, and how often he's been thrown into a role that he might not have been ready for, and what another full offseason is, but really kind of at least hopefully through training camp, what it looks like when Williams could truly understudy Milano as he plays, and what a rotational role can look like for him, and how that can build his confidence, and how that could develop him as a player. Because maybe slow burning those reps to him and getting him the chance to get on field, not so much in high leverage situations, but as that third linebacker when we want to run base, or because we're just giving Milano a blow and you just want to come in and get him his rep, maybe in a blowout or something along those lines. Hopefully a Bills causing the blowout in a good way, because causing does not mitigate the jinx I just put on them. Like those are the things that I think can help his development too. Because even though I say it with like Dalton Kincaid, you got to get your reps. I definitely do think that with Williams, for someone who is as raw and unrefined as he was, being able to understudy Milano, knowing that Milano is getting a brunt of those snaps and kind of seeing what he's doing, being able to watch it in practice, what they expect from him, the dynamic component of his game where they drop him into coverage and he succeeds and how he's reacting. It's wishful thinking to say he's going to one-for-one copy it, but I do think that does benefit development for a player at any position, but especially one where maybe Williams sees it and says, this is the look they're running. I've seen this before, and I baited this. You didn't. This is what you did differently. I'm going to try and replicate that. I think that's valuable, and I'm hoping Milano can stay on the field, not just to have the play of Milano, but for that reason of being able to let just Dorian Williams get those opportunities when they come to him, not put too much on his plate. Like that pretty much has been the name of the game for the past 2 seasons with him. And ultimately, when Milano goes, hopefully you have enough of a sample size of what he was able to do to replicate and be able to pull off successfully, hopefully execute at a high level. But we'll just have to see, Ant, with all 3 of these players. There are question marks, some bigger than others, going into year 3. I am not telling any fan to be out on any of these players. I know it was a bit more of a pessimistic conversation, but I just want to see positive signs for all 3 of these players next season, as they are the remaining of the 2023 class, and you don't draft to let these guys go. You draft to have them be staple pieces, starters for years to come, and there is a world where they can, but we just need to see them prove it. And anything you want to say before we sign off, feel free to plug whatever you got going on. I know you just did, but you could do it again if you'd like in a more formal fashion, or something completely unrelated if you're bored, whatever you're feeling.
No, thank you again for having me. I had a blast as always. I appreciate the hell out of you, and I had a good time. I'll be going live right after this. Well, a little after this at 9:00. I'm having JP Acosta from SB Nation on. Like I said, we're going to dive into positions of need for the Bills on the roster as of right now, and who to watch for at each of those positions in the combine, why, how, all that stuff, moving and shaking in positional rankings, and terms of fit and everything, and what the combine can kind of lead us towards in terms of evaluation and fit. Eric and I will be doing the film room tomorrow. We're doing our offensive free agent targets / kind of wish list based on affordability, scheme fit, all that stuff. Heavy wide receiver focused episode, film, stats, schematic talk, conversation, all that kind of stuff. I'm also I've been looking to do it for the past couple of weeks. I just have not had the time. I'm looking to do an individual one-off episode on Keon Coleman from this past year, the good, the bad, showing it on tape, where he struggled, where he can improve, where he had success, what it means for the offense, how it all ties together. Nothing crazy, regular long episode, maybe like pre-recorded 25 to 30 minute, maybe even a little shorter, on what he was throughout the year, where he needs to improve, and what we need to see going forward from him this year. And that's me in a nutshell.
That's a him. And everybody, as I say every time he's on the show, but I cannot stress it enough, if you are not following Anthony on any of the social media platforms that you are on, that he is also on, if you are not checking out his show, if you are not checking out his content, what the hell is wrong with you? Stop not doing that and start watching his stuff. It's genuinely the most insightful stuff we have in our space. Ant does incredible work. He works his ass off. And that's why I wanted him on the show, because he is a very valuable part of the Bills content creator space, and someone that can help teach you a lot the way he has taught me a lot as he answers my millions of questions that I will send to his DMs throughout the regular season. If you couldn't already tell by the dynamic on the show, this is what it's like in messages. Hey, Ant, what the fuck did I just watch? Oh, this is what happened. Cool. Thanks. So everybody, check out Disguise coverage at 9 p.m. Him and JP Acosta, who is also awesome, and I followed him for a long time. For me, my name is Joe DeRosa. You can find me on Twitter /X at show_DeRosa. I have RJ's comment up here because after I am done with all my stuff for this show tonight, if I have any time, I'm 100% playing Marvel Rivals for the rest of the night. That's why I brought up Iron Man. I'm obsessed with that freaking game. Tonight's tagline was almost Fear Magneto, but I was like, you know something, maybe I won't do that. Maybe I'll wait until a random week to make the X-Men reference, but thank you all so much for tuning in, and you're awesome. This was an awesome conversation. I'm really excited to just keep looking into the development of these players. And next week, this show will be covering the rookie class. Again, a bit more of an optimistic conversation as there's 1 year sample size, but for the young player series, that is our next step, and there's a lot to talk about. So stay tuned for that. But for this week, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening. Again, check out Ant's show and the film room tomorrow. Helping out with that these weeks. I don't know. Maybe you should check Twitter at my description. But You should check out that show as well and all of the rest of the stuff we have going on in the network. I will give Ant his chance to get ready for his program. I am going to say good night. You take care. And as always, go Bills. We will see you soon.